All right, you guys, welcome to Fireside Disciple. We're doing this again. Here we are going through Proverbs, chapter 7, sitting fireside, this time inside. It's about 20 something degrees outside. And so I decided to bring the fire inside and I guess that's it. Put your feet up, grab your beverage, and we're just going to dive right into Proverbs chapter 7. It says, "My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart." I love that. Bind them on your fingers. It's like saying, get some good wisdom. And for us Christians, get it from God. Get it from God's word, because his word is life and it's there to direct you. But here, a father to his son or a father to his daughter is saying, bind that wisdom and that truth on your fingers. Bind them to your fingers. It's like you can't get away from it. Let that truth be something that's always present that you can't ignore. I mean, if you've got something bound to your fingers, there's no possible way to ignore that thing, because it's always there in front of you. It's always, touching what you're active with. And he says, hey, bind it to your fingers, because when you go to work and when you go to play, you're going to be reminded that this wisdom I've imparted to you, it's with you. Don't forget it. Take it along. And then he says, write them on the tablet of your heart. And so it's bind it with you externally and then keep it with you internally. And I think that's such a good reminder for us to go, this thing that we do as Christians, this life that we live as born again believers, it's always present with us. It's part of the outward, but it's also part of the inward. And it's not one without the other. If Christ is in you, then he should be out of you. He should be bound upon your fingers, and the things that are in your heart should be working themselves out to your hands as well. Say to wisdom, you're my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, to keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. I love that. It says, keep you from the forbidden woman. That just means from the woman, to keep you from the woman who is someone else's. Like, you could really look into this, because it's going to, in context, call her the adulteress. But in context here, you're looking at this forbidden woman as she's forbidden for a reason. Okay, she's forbidden because she's not yours. So he's saying, be wise and stay away from a woman that doesn't belong to you. The forbidden woman, somebody else's wife, somebody else is in covenant with this person. She's not yours. Keep from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. The adulteress here, that word means foreign. In other words, again, it's not your wife. So let wisdom keep you from her, from the adulterous woman, from the forbidden woman, with her smooth words. Verse 6 of Proverbs chapter 7 says, "For at the window of my house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness." I love this. We talked last time in Proverbs chapter 6 by the fire outside. We talked about just like the Proverbs. I love them because it's like a father giving advice to his son. And here is the father saying, look, I've seen this boy. I've seen this daughter. I've looked out my window and I've witnessed this behavior. I've seen among the simple, a young man lacking sense. So we're going to see a contrast here in this proverb of the young man lacking sense and then the adulterous woman just intentionally, even with her senses, going after this young man and fulfilling her own twisted, discontented desires. It says, and behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. And so she's wily of heart. I was looking at that word. It can mean to conceal. So she's almost as if this woman is going out there. They consider her, an adulterous woman, a forbidden woman, and a prostitute. And she's someone else's wife, and yet she's going out into the street, drawing this young man into her. And it says that she's wily of heart. In other words, this thing that she's doing, she's trying to conceal it, or she's trying to push that knowledge of what is good down and just going, you know what, I'm going to ignore. And so here we have a young man, who is, what did it call him? It called him, let's see here. A young man lacking sense. So here we've got a young man who's just lacking sense, and he's going out into the world lacking that sense, not understanding really the dangers ahead. And this father is going, look, I've seen this. Let me give you an example. I saw this man, he lacked sense. And then there was this woman who, full on knowing the evil that she was doing, was pushing it down. She was a wily woman. She was concealing the truth that she knew. And she's loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him. And with bold face, she says to him, I had to offer offerings, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I've found you. This is like the ultimate hypocritical moment that we see here. So here we've got a woman that's going out there intentionally to seek out her sinful desires and to fulfill them. And her reasoning for doing that and for making that acceptable in her own mind and ignoring her conscience is saying, I offered sacrifices today. And that's like a lot of times, like when the Catholic Church was first, really rising to power in Rome, and this went on for a very, very long time. And they were offering indulgences, right? You could pay a certain amount to the church. And if you paid a certain amount to the church, you were then able to forgive your sins, or to reduce your time in purgatory, or someone else's time in purgatory. And so it's very hypocritical, right? She's saying, like, I have an excuse to sin. Or sometimes those indulgences, it was you could pay to excuse the sin that you then go commit. Right. So if you wanted to go, sleep around or get drunk or something, it's like, well, I'm going to pay to have that sin forgiven. And yet we know that there's nothing you can do to make yourself right with God. There's nothing that you can do to excuse your sin aside from the grace of God. And yet this woman thinks that because, she has gone out and offered her sacrifices, now she's saying, I'm going to go back. I've started with a clean slate because I offered that sacrifice, and now I'm going to go back and sin. And that's not a place that we really want to be. It's not a place that we want to be. We don't want to take advantage of God's grace, because really you can't. And that's a whole different Bible study in itself. But we don't use his grace as an opportunity or an excuse to go and sin more. God's grace, it should tenderize our heart, you could say, and make us desire holy things and godly things. And it should bring us closer to him, not further away from him. She says in verse 16, I have spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love, for my husband is not at home. He is gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon, he will come home. So here we go. This lady is, my wife and I were talking about this proverb earlier. It's as if she is fulfilling her fantasies, right? Like a fantasy is like dwelling on something that has not happened, or that doesn't actually exist, or is not really possible. And it's really not possible to fool around like this. And like we read in the last Proverbs chapter 6, to not get burned, right? It said in Proverbs chapter 6 that can you hold a coals of fire close to your chest to not be burned? No, you can't. And so we're seeing that happening here. This lady is wily. She is fulfilling her own fantasies, and she's taking this young man captive into her sin. And it's crazy. So if you're sitting there and you think about a passage like this, like I do, and go, oh, like, man, who does that? Who finds that risk worth taking? We know all too well that a lot of people do. My wife was telling me this crazy story. She knows of somebody. I shouldn't even said it was my wife, but told me this, but I already said that. So she was telling me of somebody who's been married for a long time, who they've decided to have an open relationship. And this is becoming more and more popular in our culture. And it just shows how far away from God and how far away from the desires of things that are right. And we no longer have moral boundaries. But they've decided to enter an open relationship, right? So they're each allowed, as long as they let each other know who it's with, they're each allowed to partake in sexual relationships with someone else outside of marriage. And they even have children, young children. And yet they decided that this is what they wanted to do to spice things up. And that's what this young lady's doing here, except she's doing it behind the back of her husband. And in either scenario, you play with fire, you're going to get burned. It's not going to work out well. And that's what this woman is deceiving herself in doing, is she's fantasizing. She's trying to convince herself and this young man that we can partake of forbidden fruit or the water that's from someone else's well, and think that we're not going to get caught, and think that we're not going to suffer the consequences of this behavior. And that's just not the case. We know that. And so here's like a dad pleading with his son saying, hey boy, I've seen this and it never goes well. We even read in the last Proverbs, in Proverbs chapter 6, that for jealousy makes a man furious and he will not spare when he takes revenge. And this young man is the simpleton. He's the simple-minded youth, lacking sense, and here he is being deceived by this adulterous person, this adulterous woman. She says, my husband is gone. And with much seductive speech, she persuaded him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me. It'll cost you your life, but I was reading this book called The Relational Soul. And in this, it's these two biblical counselors who are former pastors. And they were speaking about a man that they had counseled who was a pastor. And this pastor had been fooling around on Craigslist. And he kept fooling around more and more because he didn't get caught. And he'd look at something he shouldn't be looking, and he wouldn't get caught. And it was like in the sex ads or something like that. And within those things, he ended up getting further and further into his fantasies, looking around at the ads and looking around at the sexual things that people were offering or asking for favors on Craigslist. And before you know it, he found himself at the house of a couple who were willing to, the man was willing to allow him to have sex with his wife in front of him. Again, open relationship, like we're talking, playing with fire, like we've been talking about in Proverbs chapter 6, the deceitful woman here that we're looking at in Proverbs chapter 7, both of these, but doing it openly and not behind the back is like another kind of evil. And so this pastor finds himself in this place because he's let his fantasies get away with him. And little by little, he dulled his conscience to the point where all of a sudden he was in this room with this couple about to fulfill his fantasy with a gun in his pocket in case things went weird. And luckily he came to his senses and left before he fulfilled physically his sin. And he eventually ended up, confessing it to his wife soon after. And she forced him to seek counsel. She pleaded with him to seek counsel, in which he did. And as the story went in this book, he couldn't believe that he allowed himself to go to that place and get that far away. But it's cunning, like the craftiness of sexual sin and dwelling upon our fantasies that are sinful. Eventually, if we keep going down that path, like this young man going down the road near the prostitute and being enticed to come in and excusing the behavior, we can shock ourselves to the depths of depravity that we will go if we don't take precaution, if we don't seek counsel and listen to the counsel that we've received and walk in the wisdom that God's given us. We'll end up in some really weird places, in this case, in the bed with a woman that belongs to another man who's already got a husband. And it's not good. That outcome never ends up good. It says in verse 21, with much seductive speech, she persuades him, and with smooth talk, she compels him. All at once, he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast. I like this. It says in Hebrew, as a chain to discipline a fool. This is like as if your foot were caught in stocks, like you were, you see like the prisoners, right? With the chains and the ball and chains, keeping them captive. It's saying like you're done. Like you've been taken captive. Your sin has had the victory in this scenario. And as a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. Verse 24, and now, O sons, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways, and do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. Wow. So next week or next time, we'll be looking at Proverbs chapter 8, which will be a little different. It'll be the blessings of wisdom, but we've been looking a lot at this topic of adultery. So the Bible does have a lot to say about avoiding this sin. And I want to tell you, like, the only way to avoid this sin is really to listen to and apply God's wisdom in our lives, in our thinking, in our emotional lives, and in our physical lives. Like this father is saying to his son, bind this wisdom around your fingers. So when you toy with the thought of going out and touching another man's wife or touching another man's husband, women, you remember that wisdom that says, don't go there. Don't play with fire. It's not worth it. It's the way to death. And you'll never be victorious along that road, no matter what you try to tell yourself to excuse that behavior, like this adulterous woman in Proverbs chapter 7. It's never going to be a worthy road. And so with that, thank you guys for joining me by the fire. This has been another Fireside disciple. Hope you guys enjoy this. It's just me going through Proverbs as I'm going through them myself, and you're kind of just sitting down, hanging out with me. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining me. Talk to you soon. Bye.